Every legendary hero is a good unit. Every single one. Let's dive into the Fire Legendaries and talk about what roles each unit excels at, how they rank, and of course how your favorite does. A legendary unit's most common threats are other legendaries, so that's the matchups we're going to measure each of these units against. They're the best way to measure their combat effectiveness because you'll see them so many times. Each unit is given an Omni +6 in the simulation, and they're awarded 1 point for a win, -1 point for a loss, and 0 points for a draw. We'll do that for both the player and the enemy phase. At the end, we'll include arena scoring and support capabilities. I'm also throwing Duo Chrom in because he's so common that he's become an honorary legendary. But before we begin, let me know in the comments who your go-to Fire Legendary is. But let's get started with our newest Fire Legendary. Mixed phase units terrify me as investments, and that's what Xander is. He has a ton of effects: slaying, conditional NFU, a breath effect, Canto, and damage reduction. The question is, how does he actually do in combat versus the other legendaries? Well folks, these are really good results. They give him the 4th highest score of every legendary in the game in the player phase. They're less spectacular when you consider that this is the newest Fire Legendary, but the added survivability makes him a formidable unit. In season, he takes care of business. I would have liked to see more wins, but Duo Chrom, Marth, and Hector are 3 of the best enemy phase units in Arena right now. Speaking of, let's look at his enemy phase results. I know the score is a -4, but that's the 10th highest score of all legendaries. IS has been releasing offensive powerhouses lately. It's impressive to me that Xander survives Sita's effective damage, for instance, but it's less spectacular when you look in-season. We'll have to travel a few generations down before we get in-season results this bad. It's tough when you only win an enemy phase bout with legendary Ephraim. But it would be short-sighted to dismiss these. I think of this unit a lot like legendary Dimitri. This is a player phase unit that can be set up to survive on an enemy phase encounter. The one thing that Dimitri has in his corner is the fact that he's infantry. Infantry units have a lot more skill inheritance options, and so they age better and are more flexible. Still, 3 movement squares is really nice. Outside of Colosseum, he's a monster in summoner duels. In Aether Raids, well, he's more of a gimmick, but still a really good unit. Let's move on to one of my favorite units now. Current arena maps love flyers, and this is one of the best in the game. Eitri is an excellent hit-and-run unit in a mode that normally doesn't allow that kind of thing. A score of 32 is great for a unit that is approaching a year old, and it's even better when you look at the in-season matchups. Also, this is the 3rd highest player phase scores of all legendaries. She loses to the same crew that Xander did, but we're going to see a lot of that. Still, defeating the latest 4 generations of the Fire Legendaries is pretty spectacular. But before I get ahead of myself, we should probably take a look at her enemy phase. A -12 is enough to put her in 14th place, which isn't terrible, but it's clear how this unit was designed. You'll want to steer clear of most in-season legendaries, and let's face it, once Celica gets her refined, you'll probably want to steer clear of all of them. Still, there are some interesting standouts. I didn't expect her to survive legendary Chrom, for instance. I guess damage reduction does help. But it's worth noting that this unit has uses in every game mode. She's fantastic in Aether Raids and Summoner Duels. The Kitchen Gremlin is an excellent unit to have in your barracks, and she functions well at any merge level. But let's move on to a unit that does one thing very, very well. Lilina is the prototypical glass cannon. Look at the stat line. The theme is just dump the defense and stack attack. After a buff, 83 is just so high. You're getting hit with an AoE and then her tome. She's a special spamming nightmare, and that means she ties for the highest player phase score, even though she's coming up on 2 years old. There are only 2 legendaries that don't die to her. If I sound impressed, it's because I am. The story gets better when you look at the in-season matchups. These are pristine results. Should we really look at the enemy phase? This is the 7th worst enemy phase score of all legendaries. We'll get to the worst. They're in fire season, as it turns out. We could talk about the in-season matchups, but the moral of the story is make sure this unit is out of the line of fire. I've got a lull on this unit, but you might want to sacrifice some firepower for a trace. so she has a hope of getting out of danger. Just know that if you do that, you'll lose the legendary Marth matchup. It's also worth noting that this unit has a lot of value in other modes. The built-in Hardy Bearing is really nice, but I've seen this unit put in work on Aetherraid's offense, defense, and summoner duels. It's just never a bad thing to have a unit that puts out massive amounts of damage and can spam specials. But let's move to a dark time in the Fire Season history. Edelgard is hard for me. I really thought this unit was going to be better. She is designed for the player phase, and the best she can do is an 11. That's not great. In fact, it's the 27th worst score out of 37 legendaries. When you look at the in-season legendaries, you remember that Fire Season has a lot of reds. This is a tough unit to use. In the enemy phase, it's ugly. I've seen builds that double down and use Far Save. It helps a little bit, and she's still 15 of 37 for score. But look at the in-season legendary matchups. This unit is just outclassed right now. There's another element. Because of the solo condition, this unit can be very hard to use. I've got Assault Troop in my fictional best kit, but that doesn't score high enough. If you take away movement, this unit's solo condition gets very difficult to meet. But wait, I said every legendary was good. She does shine in Aetherraid's offense right now. The fact that you can use Gale Force to get 3 actions is not a small deal, and she gets extra mythic support, which can kind of shore up her stats. Still, if you're an Edelgard fan, you're just living for a refine. This is getting tough. I know I said every legendary was still good, but Celica is hard to use right now. A 9 ties for the 29th worst score of all legendaries. This unit needs a refine so badly, and seeing her Ascendant version should give Celica fans hope. The in-season matchups, yeah, they're ugly. This unit is really putting my theory to the test. Enemy phase. Folks, this is the worst enemy phase score of any legendary right now. She needs a lot in both phases. If you want to get some use out of her, pairing her with Winter Bernie can get her in a desperation range, and then she finally starts doing some damage in Aetherraids. It's a tried and true strategy that is really fun. Let's move on to an interesting couple of sword units so you can forget you saw this one. Relief! Now we're into the refines, and Roy looks so much better. Things are already looking up with a player phase score of 14, which puts him in rank 23 of 37. It's respectable, and it gives him some dimension. The in-season matchups aren't bad at all. He at least doesn't die to the newest Fire legendaries, but I really wanted to see him pummel Edelgard. If this unit had no follow-up in his kit, these results would be so different. The enemy phase is really interesting. I know Zero looks bad, but this is the 7th best enemy phase legendary. It's really what he was designed for. The in-season matchups are not great. Basically, if you're new, Roy dies. Still, this is a 4-year-old unit who got a decent refine. If you want to use him in Aetherraid's offense, he's actually a lot of fun either as a Gale Forcer or just a tank. The biggest problem is you can't help but compare him to Marth, who is just bonkers. I ask, why didn't you give him no follow-up? You are all going to make me say it, aren't you? If this unit scored well and they let him use a real A skill, he'd be an amazing Fire legendary. I'm just continually astounded. Scoring a 21 means he's the 13th best player phase of any legendary. It's not bad. His in-season matchups are good, not great. Surviving Duochrome, though, is not a small thing. But he ends up not winning in 7 out of 10 key matchups. Let's talk about the thing that surprises me the most. This is the highest enemy phase score of any legendary, even with the bad A skill. That's right, the max score is 11. I know he loses to Lilina, but so does everyone. Look at this, he even survives Nana. It's worth noting that lulls are his kryptonite, but remember, with tier 4 B skills entering the meta, lulls are going to be rare. So where do you want to put this unit? I've seen him in absolutely every game mode. Aetherraid's defense as a melee threat, Aetherraid's offense as the unit that solos my defense, and Summoner Duels as a raid boss. In PvE content, you can put him on auto battle and just laugh. This is probably the best value on the remix banners right now. But this next unit is close. Out of this batch, Legendary Hector was the unit that was the hardest for me to wrap my head around. The days of him being an Omni tank are far behind us, but this is one of the few legendary armors and you can go to town with near save. Let's talk about the player phase first, where his score of 16 ties him for the 19th best player phase. You're gonna notice something. This unit is the king of inconclusives. The only 2 units he outright loses to in season are himself and Dual Crom. The big knock on him is mobility. It's just tough to get him in position. When you do, he really delivers though. The enemy phase is where things get really interesting. A 9 is high enough to make him the second best enemy phase legendary in the game. Let that sink in. I know this isn't a cheap kit, but wow. The only unit he loses to are mages that overcome his wary effect and Nana. He levels most melee threats. I almost wish he was in the same season as Sigurd so I could just stop worrying about that stupid unit. We've basically covered it, but the in-season matchups are good. Losing to Eitri, Lilina, and Celica stings a bit, but if you're looking at him as a near savior, it changes the outlook. In other modes, he has some serious versatility. When he's in season, he's amazing in Aether Raids on both offense and defense. In Summoner Duels, he can play the near savior role or use Ostia's Pulse to buff and pulse down your team specials. This is a really good unit, and you all know how I feel about melee armors. IS has been very, very kind to them. But it's time to move on to our last Fire Legendary. Ephraim is a really interesting unit. With a player phase score of 17, he's at lucky number 18, which is solidly middle of the pack. You can see the matchups. He puts out some really nice damage. In season, he does great as long as you're not green, but he doesn't have the damage throughput to overcome color disadvantage. In the enemy phase, he scores a negative 17, which strangely is enough to put him in 18th of 37 again. It's kind of the theme with this unit. He's good, but not great. The fact that so many of the newer legendaries were green really hurt him though. With the kit he has, he can do some really interesting things in Aether Raids, namely hit and run Gale Force hybrids work really well with him. The fact that his damage is middling means that you'll almost certainly hit twice, and that actually helps with him proccing Gale Force. He's definitely unexpected, and you can delight in the fact that your opponent will wonder what exactly hit them. In the end, having to use a dual skill is just tough for this unit, as it is with all the older legendaries. I've seen plenty of these units in use though. He can put in work as a role player, but it's time to look at the combat results. I've organized these by their natural breaks, and the player phase S is pretty obvious with Lilina, Eitri, and Xander being the offensive powerhouses. We saw that play out in The Sims. These guys kill stuff. A tier is mostly the defensive powerhouses that can still put out a lot of damage. It makes sense. Part of being a good enemy phase unit is being able to kill units before they kill you. B tier are the units that are struggling, to be honest, and in this case, need a refine. It'll be coming eventually, and judging by the refines we've seen, they should be pretty good. The enemy phase is a little different because it's just so hard to be an enemy phase unit in this game right now. Still, Fire Season has the top 2 enemy phase units in Marth and Hector. In A tier, both Roy and Xander are certainly serviceable, if not amazing. It's an asset to both units. B tier, well, B tier isn't great. Sometimes they win. That covers these units pretty well. I've played with all of these B tier units in the past week, and I definitely don't put them in harm's way on purpose. C tier is the dregs. If you breathe on these units wrong, they will fall over. Seriously, it's rough. But let's look at the special skills each unit has. The problem with a list like this is it minimizes a lot of other things these units do. This is my attempt to remedy that. Canto is the first thing to consider. In the Coliseum modes, it's like a free positional skill. It absolutely changes how the mode plays and makes things so much easier. Units that include that in their preference weapons or skills get a huge bump in their value. For Fire Season, that's Xander, Ephraim, and Eitri. Movement is the next consideration, and if you hadn't had the pleasure of using flyers in the Coliseum, I feel for you. The current maps favor flyers so heavily. They've put rivers, trenches, mountains, and every other thing that is an impediment to units without wings. It's compounded by the number of movement enhancement skills that flyers have available. The orders and guidance seals are just phenomenal. Eitri is the only flying fire legendary, and I highly recommend her. Being ranged has two big advantages in the Colosseum. One is the ability to stay further away from your target. It means you're less likely to kill one enemy and have to tank 3 others. But the other element is AI manipulation. A threatened unit will be rallied by their allies if those allies can't attack. This is huge if you need to stall while the rest of your team gets into position. Eitri, Lilina, and Celica can all perform this. Hey, we found something Celica can do! The last thing to consider is special support skills. The only fire legendary with one of these is Hector. I've already talked about how I prefer him with a save skill, but depending on your team composition, you might need to pulse down your team specials. It can be very useful in the Colosseum and really any other mode. No one likes the scoring system for Arena. No one. But it's what we have. A lot of modes run on this, so it's good to know. Right now, the highest score is held by Xander at 760. In general, a legendary score is good for about 2 years though. After that, you start to need more merges and special skills on your bonus heroes. Eitri at 758 is still very respectable, but when we hit Lilina, who's almost 2 years old, and Edelgard at 756, you have to get creative to maintain high ranks. The reason we have the clump at 754 is because of the dual skills though. The fact that you have to use them greatly hampers performance. Units like Marth are still very serviceable, but you have to perform some scoring gymnastics. Enough of this stuff though. Let's talk about the final tier list. We have arrived. This is a conglomerate of all the items we've discussed so far: combat effectiveness, special skills, and scoring. My preferred fire legendary is definitely Eitri. She just brings so much to the table and she's a blast to play with, but you saw Xander's results. He's a very respectable unit who could perform at a high level. Lilina holds A because she just destroys things. Seriously, you saw the Sims. It will be a bit until she starts to struggle, unless the Dragon Apocalypse comes sooner than expected. Dragon Wall is not kind to Lilina. In B tier, this is in order, and Marth is the clear winner. If he scored better, he'd easily be in A tier, and maybe S. I'd have to think about it, but I said it in his analysis, this unit is such a value on those remix banners. I'm a huge Hector fan, and I think you can do a lot of fun things with him, but Roy is stuck in Marth's shadow. His refine is honestly decent, but how do you not compare him to the other sword infantry that got a refine almost a year before him, and it was better? C tier is suffering. I don't think I need to hammer these units any harder. Ephraim is just old. The other two desperately need refines. They all have their niches, but don't go out of your way to summon for any of these units. Whew. Okay, we made it. I wanted to do all the legendaries in one big tier list, but folks, that would have been a 2-hour video, and that's just too much. As is, this was a lot of work to put together, so let me know in the comments if this was helpful. If this does well, I'll plan on doing the other seasons. But a couple more things. It's fair to say that only the fire season has been optimized. It means the ranks will change and get better as we go, but don't be surprised if you see some adjustments. The sim wasn't updated at this time with the Dragon Distant Counterseal, for instance. I also want to address duo units and why I didn't include more. Duo units win, period. Trust me, I simmed them. If every unit loses, then it doesn't actually affect the rankings. Which brings me to my final point. Since duos are so dominant, it's really tough to run an enemy phase unit. You all saw Crom. He almost had the same player phase score as Lilina. The motto of Arena has become strike first, strike hard. I'd highly suggest sticking to player phase strategies if you can. Anyway, a quick thanks to John, who helped me put so much of this together, and Ilya for doing so much behind the scenes, like running the entire Discord. Thank you to the brainstorming crew: Riven, FJ, Deku, Jackal, Mori, Phoenix. You guys are amazing. Summoners, take care, and schedule an appointment with your FEHologist real soon.